morning, everybody. I went to the completely wrong theater. So hopefully everybody had a good time last night, and so we're on for the second day of the conference. So we've been running the Cyber Symposium simultaneously with the AFCEA event upstairs, but we decided to come down and share some lessons learned from people who have migrated applications to the cloud, along with highlighting pitfalls and things that you need to worry about when you start moving your applications to the cloud. So with that said, these are kind of the steps that we're going to talk about today. And you need to look at this at a per application basis. For those who've ever heard me talk about the cloud before, there's no silver bullet in the world of cloud computing. There's no one size fits all, and there's no solution that's going to solve all your problems. So number one is you need to do an app rationalization stage. You need to go through your existing applications, survey what you've got, figure out what all the technical requirements are for your individual applications, and what other services or applications that your application talks to or communicates with on a regular basis. Those pieces of information will drive the rest of the chain as far as what decisions you have to make. So doing your survey, figuring out all your applications, doing your rationalization, and rationalization is very hard. For most mission partners, when you talk about app rationalization, you're talking about looking at each individual service and application and determining which ones are still needed, which ones need to be modernized, and more importantly, which ones each need to go away. And when you start talking about applications going away, you're talking about the human side of what we do. App rationalization, which affects downsizing the number of applications that are in your portfolio, directly affect people's careers or what they're doing. And that's the hard part of the business that we're talking about. But at the end of the day, when we talk about creating a more efficient IT for the department, creating cost savings for the department from an IT perspective, those are the kind of hard decisions that we need to make. And unfortunately, there is no master playlist. There is no guide on how to do that. It's really up to your individual organization's business needs and your individual organization's requirements as far as what you need to do in order to complete your mission and help the warfighter. After you've done all that, then you need to start looking at some key decisions regarding funding. Moving your applications to the cloud, modernize your applications to take advantage of the cloud, all requires some kind of investment. At the end of the day, moving to the cloud, moving your applications to the cloud, I believe is going to save you some funds. But it requires an investment up front in order to make that move. And that's a thing that gets overlooked a lot when we talk about cloud at a high level, especially at a senior level within the department. The initial investment to make it happen is something that's generally overlooked. So recently, the DoD CIO signed out a memo directing all fourth estate organizations to move their workload to MilCloud 2. As part of that, there was a conscious decision made at the senior level within the department that the fourth estate organizations are going to have funds in order to do that. So as you stand up an environment in a cloud world, you need to be able to pay for that while your existing applications are running in your legacy environment. So you need dual ops, for lack of a better word, for some period of time. As you migrate your applications, you migrate your users over, and then you deprecate your legacy capability, then you'll start to see a cost savings. But during that time period, there requires some kind of investment. Like everything in the department, when you start talking about investment of that kind of size, you're talking about a POM cycle. So how do we move at cloud speed when we POM for money 4 years ago? It's hard, right? I'm not gonna tell you there's an easy button there, but it's hard. What you have to do is you have to start looking at what finances you have available to you and start making key decisions about where you're going to make investments to migrate things to the cloud and what you're going to push off. The migration activities, honestly, they're no different than migrating from one legacy environment to another, right? It's the same types of things that you have to worry about: ports, protocols, technical stuff, like, that kind of. That's stuff that we do, and we know that, right? So the actual technical side of migrating your application to the cloud is fairly straightforward. Now, I will say, if you're refactoring your application to take advantage of all the APIs that cloud services have available to them, that's a little more complex. But in general, the migration activities of moving your actual application to the cloud is the easy part. And then ultimately documenting your lessons learned and repeating, right? And this is on a case-by-case, application-by-application basis that you need to perform these kind of activities. I'm going to tell you the hardest part is the app rationalization, the business decisions, and the finance side. The actual moving your applications to the cloud, the actual making your applications work in the cloud, that's pretty straightforward. It's really the more soft side of things that tend to be the most difficult. Any questions? Yes, sir. How do you avoid getting stuck in the rationalization phase? I will tell you what we've seen a lot of mission partners do is they actually hire a company who specifically specializes in app rationalization, and they come in and drive that train, right? So you look at some of the co-coms and services that have kind of led the way as far as migrating applications to the cloud, and that's how they did it. They brought in an expert that can, for lack of a better word, drive that train to keep you from getting marred down in the app rationalization phase. As part of the data center consolidation effort, everybody in the DoD was supposed to do an app rationalization about 3 years ago. Last time I checked, I think about 10% of the DoD actually did it, right? So we were supposed to have been doing this for years. But if you don't have a plan, you can easily get marred down in the app rationalization phase. And like I said, it's the hardest part. It's the hardest part out of this whole thing, is doing that phase. Yes, sir. So the question was about, are we moving applications and capabilities to containers versus using traditional hosting? And I will say that it once again, it's on a case-by-case basis, and it really depends on who the mission partner is. You take an organization like Air Force, AFCCE, right? Their Common Computing Environment. They made a corporate decision that all new application development would be built on a Docker platform. Now that's new application development, right? So not necessarily migrating legacy stuff, not necessarily modernizing legacy stuff, but all new application development would be done on the Docker platform so that they had that containerized model so they could easily move it from one cloud service provider to another. Other organizations have chosen a particular cloud provider's API stack and gone all in, right? I'm going to use every API made available to me by one of the big cloud service providers. I wouldn't say I know the percentage. It's a mixed bag across the department. The containerized model works well for certain types of applications. For heavy IOP-based applications, database-type applications, it tends not to work too well. But it works very well for other types of applications. Yeah. Yes, sir. So I will tell you, so the question was about lift and shift. Is lift and shift the right first step to take to get your applications into the cloud model? I will tell you that I'm not a fan of lift and shift, simply because the general perception amongst leadership is that if I lift and shift my capabilities to the cloud, I'm going to save money. And usually what happens is it's the exact opposite. If you lift and shift a legacy application that's poorly designed, poorly engineered, or more importantly, designed for a traditional legacy model, and you put it into a cloud environment, I think you're going to be surprised by your bills. And we have cases of mission partners who have done that, right? They took a legacy application, they moved it to one of the large cloud providers, and 6 months later they're pulling it back in-house because they didn't realize what they were getting into, right? So I'm not a huge fan of lift and shift because I always make a statement that if you have a poorly designed capability in one place and you move it to another, it's still a poorly designed capability. It just runs a little faster. I mean, you're not really garnering the benefit of the cloud. Now, you can say that lift and shift is like pulling the Band-Aid off quickly, right? So if you move it to the cloud, then you've at least taken the first step of getting away from the box-hugging mentality of I have to own my infrastructure. And you're shifting to that model where you're working with a cloud provider. But the benefit that you're going to gain is, from an application perspective, is so minimal that it kind of is hard to make that business case. So, yes, sir. So the question was about disaster recovery or COOP capability for your on-prem, and I assume you're talking about hybrid solutions where you're backing up your on-prem capabilities to a cloud environment as a COOP capability. Yeah. Oh, you're talking about going to the cloud instead of a DR. So I will tell you that I'm actually an advocate of cloud in the form of all of the major cloud providers, all the major cloud capabilities have some kind of COOP capability built in as part of the cloud environment, right? That's one of the tenets of cloud, is the fact that it's resilient and it's elastic. And so what happens is when you a cloud capability, if you host your application in a cloud provider's capability, if there's a major data center failure, that application usually fails over to another data center owned by the same cloud provider somewhere else, automatically. Now, you do have to check the terms of service with your particular cloud provider, but that's the way it generally works. And if you can live with the terms of service that are provided by your cloud provider, then you don't have to necessarily engineer a traditional DR or COOP capability. Yeah. I will tell you there are certain mission partners who have leveraged an off-prem commercial cloud provider as their DR site. So they have a traditional capability on-prem and they DR to a cloud capability. I've never seen any of them go smooth, right? So they've all experienced issues with that model. And if the reason why usually is around latency. So if their applications are designed to run locally and be very latency non-tolerant, and suddenly you're shifted to a cloud where you introduce something simple like 20 milliseconds or 25 milliseconds of delay, some applications break down in that environment. That's one case of move everything to the cloud from the beginning, because that way you know what you're dealing with. It's when you start making those changes of shifting from on-prem to off-prem to on-prem to off-prem that those kind of things start to crop up as an issue. Okay. So when we start talking about cloud, one of the things we need to talk about is the impact level, or the level of data that you're dealing with. And for those folks who sat in my Cloud 101 session yesterday, this is going to be a little bit of a repeat. But as you start doing your app rationalization, your survey, one of the things you need to do is you need to bucket each one of your applications into a particular impact level. And this is really dealing with the impact level of the data that the application is using and storing. And so the levels that we deal with within the department are 2, 4, 5, and 6. So everybody looks at that and says instantly, well, where's 1 and 3? So we had 1 and 3, and after operating for about a year within the department from a cloud perspective, we consolidated 1 and 2 together, and we consolidated 3 and 4 together. Just for simplicity purposes from a mission partner perspective, because it was kind of hard to explain what the differences between some of those were. And rather than renumbering them and then having to go back and fix everything, we just simply left those numbers out. So we have 2, 4, 5, and 6. So level 2 data is pure unclassified data, right? That's stuff that's available publicly. So picture things like Army.mil, Navy.mil, those kind of websites that are recruiting tools for high school students. Level 4 data, that's your FOUO data, or CUI. That's things that are sensitive but controlled. So that's generally the data that we picture as being on NIPRNet. Level 5 data is when we start getting into PII, personal identifiable information, healthcare information, HIPAA type data, or national security data, right? And so that's more, so it's still FOUO, but it's more sensitive and it needs to be stricter controlled. That's level 5 data. And then level 6 is anything classified, right? So anything above FOUO. When you start looking at your applications, you need to start bending them based on the impact level of the data. And the reason why is because that's going to dictate what cloud service providers are available to you to host your applications. So level 2, there are, I think, over 150 providers that are out there that are level 2 certified, right? When you start talking about level 4 and 5, the list gets much smaller. And when you start talking about level 5, you can count them on one hand, okay? And so the providers that meet those specifications become more and more finite, and those are the companies you need to work with to ultimately host your capability. It's important because as part of your business case phase, those are the types of things you need to know in order to get true costing and pricing for your capability. All right, when you start looking at your applications, you need to start bending them, right? So we talked about bending them from an impact level, but you need to also bend them from a cloud appropriateness level, right? And so what we've done is we've come up with this list where basically you could take an application, an existing application, and determine whether it's cloud ready, whether it's cloud appropriate, or whether it's not appropriate, right? And this is part of the app rationalization phase that you need to do. And when you start looking at whether or not a particular application fits into one of those 3 buckets, there are 4 or 5 categories that we look at. So number 1 is the financial side, right? So you need to look at what the cost is going to be in order to make an application cloud enabled or cloud ready or able to take advantage of the cloud capabilities. I said earlier there's a cost involved in migrating to the cloud. There's a cost in modernizing applications to take advantage of the cloud APIs. And so you need to look at those costs as part of the decision about how you're gonna categorize those applications. If it's a small investment, then that's great. If it's a larger investment, then that kind of starts to shift it over to the right-hand side of this chart. The next thing you need to look at is the security posture of your application, right? How dependent are you on other capabilities to provide the security levels for your application? If the application is really dependent on other capabilities, you need to calculate that into your decision when you start looking at should an application move to the cloud or not. An example there is something like intrusion detection, right? If you're reliant on somebody else to provide your intrusion detection as part of your application, when you move to the cloud, who's going to provide your intrusion detection when you do that, right? So those are key things that you need to decide as you take a particular application and put it into one of those 3 categories. And by the way, PowerPoint murdered these slides in display mode. It looks a lot better when you get the printed copy. These slides are available on the will be available on the dista.mil website. So, and they look much better when you pull them up in PowerPoint. The next two categories you need to look at are operations and contracting. So operations, once again, you need to look at how you currently operate your app. Who is your system administration? Who does it on a day-to-day basis? Who does your CSSP support, your security, your cybersecurity provider capabilities? And when you move to the cloud, are those same folks going to still be able to do that? And that needs to be a key part of your decision also, right? So, and then the last one is the contracting side. So contracting in the cloud from a DoD perspective, I hate to say it, is a little difficult. And the reason why is because the cloud model does not fit the traditional DoD acquisition model, right? The traditional DoD acquisition model is geared towards buying a weapon system. And when we start talking about cloud and the speed of cloud and how cloud is done, we struggle a little bit, right? So one of the key tenets of cloud is the fact that it's utility-based billing. You pay for what you consume, not for what you provision. That's a key tenet of cloud. How do you do that in a contract from a DoD perspective that makes sense? And it's something that I will say that we've all struggled with. Now, mission partners have done a lot of creative things to get around that, right? So one of the most popular ways we find that mission partners contract or run capabilities in the cloud is they go to a system integrator, one of their system integrators they have on in-house, and a company like Lockheed or General Dynamics or that kind of company, and they put money on an ODC on that contract to buy cloud, right? So the actual contract between the cloud provider is with the integrator, not with the government. And so because of that, when the government has a problem, you now have an intermediary you have to deal with, right? So it's a little bit of an issue there. But that's one way that the government gets around how do we buy utility-based build capabilities on a government contract. I wish the billing model from a cloud service provider aspect was a federally controlled industry. So capabilities like your electric bill, your phone bill, those are federally regulated industries. And so because of that, we the DoD can buy them in a utility model, right? Post-camp bases and installations buy power based on actual usage. They just don't pay a flat monthly fee. But those are federally regulated industries, and that's the way that we can do that. But when you start dealing with things that are not federally regulated and they're utility-based billing, then we start breaking down from an acquisition standpoint about how we're going to do that. So there are lots of different ways to do it, but how you contract for your cloud capability and the ceilings that you have available to you based on how you do that is something you need to look at as part of your business case. All right. I skipped one. No, maybe not. Okay. So I kept talking about cloud tenants. And so these are the general tenants that we talk about when we talk about moving an application to the cloud. So number one, I've kind of harped on this a little bit, but cloud solutions are utility builds, right? So they're solutions that are available that are billed on a utility basis for what you consume and not for what you provision. And this is a key difference than the traditional way of looking at compute within the department. But it is the number one most important part of what we do from a cloud perspective as far as what makes it different than traditional compute. The second big tenet, it has to be scalable, and this is kind of closely related to one down below it also, which is elastic. Cloud capabilities need to be in a model that you can buy small and scale fast. Likewise, your applications need to be able to scale up and down dynamically based on mission demand. And so those are key tenets that are important to moving your applications to the cloud. The next one is something that is generally overlooked, but a management portal, right? The whole purpose of cloud is supposed to be self-service. Mission partners are supposed to be able to go in, provision their capability, run their capability, turn off their capability, change their solution, whatever, completely dynamically without necessarily having to bring in a system administrator to do it. And be able to see what they're consuming from a cost perspective in the cloud, real time. And that's something that's key. All major cloud providers provide some kind of management portal, but it is a key part of what we consider being cloud ready. So I talked a little bit about real-time elasticity, which is really about the ability to expand and contract dynamically based on requirements of any given time of the mission. And then security services, right? So as you move to the cloud from a traditional DoD data center, you're going to lose some of the security capabilities that you had available to you in the past. So as you move to the cloud, you need to be cognizant of the fact that you need to add on security capabilities in order to meet the same DoD requirements that you met when you were running in a traditional data center. And that's things like intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, firewalls, all the kind of things that you would expect when you're in a DoD data center. When you move to a commercial cloud environment, now you have to kind of bring that stuff with you. So that's a cost that you need to worry about. But it is a key tenet of moving to the cloud. It's the fact that you have to have these security services available to you. When we start talking about moving applications to the cloud, the model that we talk about the most is the infrastructure as a service model. And this is the basic correlation between traditional compute, right? So infrastructure as a service is about as equivalent to buying a traditional server sitting on a server floor as you can get. When you buy infrastructure as a service in a cloud model, there's a key break there about where the cloud service provider is responsible for and what you as a mission owner or mission partner are responsible for. I bring this slide up because when we go talk to mission partners, everybody's definition of where that line is different, okay? But I will tell you that from an industry perspective, this line does not change. So when you start talking to a commercial cloud provider, they are going to tell you that they're responsible for the hypervisor down. From the guest OS up, that's your responsibility. Whether you contract with somebody to do that, whether you have somebody else do that, whether you have your own system administrators do that, that's still something that you as a mission partner are responsible for. At the end of the day, your AO, your authorizing official, is going to sign his or her name on a dotted line of a piece of paper saying they take the risk for the application or the security posture of that service. And what they're taking the risk for is everything above that line, right? So the guest OS up. Services like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Oracle, SAP, MilCloud 2, pick whatever cloud service you're talking about. When you provision a service within that capability, you're going to get a guest OS as part of that, right? So when you go in and provision a virtual machine, you're going to say, I want a Red Hat Enterprise Linux version 7.x enterprise, virtual machine as part of my data center. So they're going to give you the guest OS. But once they give you the guest OS and they give you here's your root username and password, you're on your own. Securing, stigging, and maintaining that operating system from that day forward is your responsibility. So you need to make sure that you have the expertise available or have contracted for the expertise to do that day-to-day care and feeding of your servers and applications. Any questions about this? All right. This is a key thing, right? When you start looking at things like platform as a service, then you start moving up that stack, right? So now you're saying with platform as a service, you're saying that the cloud service provider is going to be responsible for everything up to the runtime capability. So only the application and the data is really your responsibility. Platform as a service is something that we've struggled with in the department, right? Platform as a service means that mission partners need to take software or capabilities out of the box and consume them and use them out of the box, right? This is not 300 days of customization to meet some obscure DoD requirement, right? This is using a commercial capability out of the box. That's the only way platform as a service works, and that's one reason why we in the DoD have struggled with platform as a service in the past. We have had pockets of success, but they are just that, pockets of success, right? Now, where we see more and more folks within the department going is towards software as a service, right? So the SaaS model kind kind of flips things upside down a little bit, and the fact that the service provider is responsible for almost everything in the stack, except for the actual data itself, right? The data is still you still own the data, but you're paying the software, the SaaS provider, to maintain the data for you. We see this model picking up a lot of traction within the department. And this goes towards, when you start looking at migrating your applications into the cloud, what we're seeing a lot of mission partners say is, I don't actually want to migrate my application to the cloud at all. I just want to buy seats of an existing capability and move. Office automation is a prime suspect for this, right? So traditional email, those kind of capabilities, web sharing capabilities. There's a lot of software as a service out there that meets those kind of requirements. And in general, the requirements to create a presentation from one organization to another isn't really that unique. And that's the reason why the SaaS model works in that world. Another place where we see SaaS picking up traction is in the world of ITSM or CRM, customer management, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of commonality amongst the department about what we do there, and so there's a lot of traction being picked up in that world. When you start getting into mission space, that's where the SaaS model breaks down a little bit, right? So things that are specific to your individual organization. Whether you be, I had a pretty lengthy conversation yesterday with the Defense Commissary Organization, right? So the Defense Commissary Organization, while they do the same types of things as somebody like the Defense Logistics Agency does, in the form of tracking the movement of items from one location to another, accountability for quantities, just-in-time supply, all that kind of stuff. The Defense Commissary also has very specific applications for the commissary model that the Defense Logistics Agency does not have, right? And so there's certain things where you can look at a SaaS model, but then there are others where when you start delving into very specific mission requirements, that you need to look at traditional hosting or infrastructure as a service to host your type of application. I guess the key takeaway there is while we see a lot of folks going towards SaaS, it tends to be for common types of services and not so much in the mission-specific areas, right? All right. Lessons learned from applications that have moved to the cloud. So I actually own contracts. I host applications in 4 different cloud providers. Okay, so I host applications in Amazon Web Services, I host applications in Microsoft Azure, I host applications in MillCloud 2, and I host applications in Oracle's Rackspace. As we moved applications into each of those capabilities, the lessons learned are really what we garnered from that as far as helping the business case for when we move the next application, as far as picking the right place, making it work, all those kind of things. So number one, I've talked about this, I've kind of harped on this, about applications aren't cloud ready, right? So you need to, as that first step of surveying and doing your app rationalization, you need to really determine which applications are cloud ready, which ones can go the easiest, right? The low-hanging fruit. And those are the easy ones to go. What we've also discovered in talking to mission partners is not everybody has the expertise on hand to modernize their applications to take advantage of the cloud or to be cloud ready. Especially when you talk about legacy applications that were designed in the 70s, coded in the 80s, recoded in the 90s, recoded for Y2K, and they're built on COBOL, right? And they use a Spark chipset. That's the kind of world we live in, right? And so when you start talking about those kind of applications and you start talking about moving to the cloud, and when you talk about moving to the cloud, you're talking about an x86 chipset with a standard operating system using, 3GL type languages. And you look at a legacy application and there's a lot of heavy work that has to be involved to modernize them to work in that model. Not every mission partner has the expertise to do that. So when you start looking at that, One option is that you contract out, those kind of capabilities. There's a particular COCOM, that contracted out with a provider. They came in and they modernized the applications one by one. And so that's one way to deal with that if you don't have the expertise in-house to help you migrate your applications from one environment to the other. I mean, this entire showcase is filled with vendors who I guarantee you would help you make that transition, for the right amount of money. I mean, they're all in it to make the money, right? So, the second thing is the commercial cloud model isn't always the best fit for a DoD application. And this is really talking about how the commercial cloud providers price and charge for their capabilities. In general, all the big cloud providers provide you really cheap compute, really cheap storage, and where they make their money is they meter you on your I/O consumption. And while that seems really easy, you look at an application and you say, well, my application has, 150 users, and they access the system, for 8 hours a day, right? And my bandwidth throughput to my end user is X. So as part of your business case analysis, you make that determination, you're good to go. What you don't look at is the fact that that application reaches out and touches 15 other legacy applications that are not in the cloud environment yet. And they have to transverse all the way back, get data, and come back. And that transaction happens every 2 seconds, right? And when you start looking at those transactions added with the user transactions, suddenly you end up with a cost model that's no longer beneficial. There's a use case of a particular COCOM that moved an application, a very important application, to a commercial cloud provider, and then 6 months later they moved it back on-prem because they spent their entire year's budget in 6 months. And the reason why was for transaction fees, right? It's one of those where they moved the application to the cloud, and the application had, multiple reachbacks into legacy systems that were still housed in a DoD facility somewhere else. And so that goes back to that whole doing your survey, doing your app rationalization. You really need to look at all of the things that your applications touch. And unfortunately, most of our applications are not standalone applications, right? Most of them have some kind of input, feed, tie into other capabilities. And I'm not saying that because it has one, it discounts it. I'm just simply saying you need to calculate that into when you start looking at where you should host your capability. And make sure that you understand the terms of service with your commercial cloud provider when you start making that move. The last one on this slide is about the security posture. A lot of applications within the Department of Defense rely on somebody else to provide the security posture for their applications. So if you're in a traditional DoD data center, that data center usually has some kind of premise routing, premise management capability. Firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, all those kind of things that are provided as part of the facility. And that's a cost that's associated with when you put your capability in that facility that is usually buried down in some operations cost. It's not generally charged to the individual application. When you move to the cloud, now you have to bring that. You have to provide that capability as part of your application. Or you have to have somebody who's willing to provide it to you as part of the solution when you move to the cloud. Once again, just an additional cost that you need to be concerned about when you start making those decisions about when and where you move your applications to. All right, business challenges. So I've talked about this a little bit, but right now, when you start looking at buying cloud capabilities, there's no outlet, there's no mall that you can go to and buy commercial cloud. It's really the Wild West from a contracting perspective right now. Each individual mission partner is required to get their own commercial cloud capability from their providers, right? So you can piggyback on somebody else. I will tell you that when I bought Amazon and Microsoft Azure, I went to NASA Soup, right? So I leveraged the NASA Soup vehicle. Trust me, I'm not trying to push anybody one way or the other, but I found another contract where I was able to tack on a task order and get my services. When we did MilCloud 2.0, we did a full and open competition, right? So there was contracting costs involved that I had to deal with that. And so, you know, there is no place where you can go to get all cloud services from one place. There's no clearing center, no mall, no GSA schedule for us to buy cloud as a commodity service. Now, there are movements underway within the department today to do that, but we're not there yet. So as part of your business decisions, you need to look at what model, what cloud you want to go into, and make sure that you account for the costs of obtaining that cloud service provider as part of that business decision. Funding's not always available, right? So this goes back to the POM cycle. Unfortunately, we live in the world of the Department of Defense where you have to POM for capabilities, you know, 3, 4, 5 years in advance. I always chuckle in the POM cycle and I argue with our comptroller on a regular basis. You know, how am I supposed to plan for what I need from a cost perspective for cloud 8 years from now when 8 years ago cloud wasn't even a word that we used? And so, you know, in the world of IT, in the world of technology, we're having to deal with traditional DoD POM cycles. And so making sure the money is available to do simple things such as modernize and migrate your applications is something that everybody's going to struggle with. I will tell you it is something we're all struggling with simultaneously, and we'll continue to go down that road, but it is something you need to be worried about. And then the last thing is policies for specific types of data. You just need to be cognizant of where your data is if it's a mission-dependent type application. Some missions require your application to be in certain places, so just be cognizant of mission-specific data types. All right, that is it for me from a slide perspective. We have about 10 minutes. We can do questions and answers if you have anything else. Yes, sir. Yeah, so for those people who couldn't hear, the question was around what we used to call single panes of glass, right? Which is really, so there are commercial providers who abstract the cloud providers into a single layer, so you can actually see each of the cloud providers, do an apples-to-apples comparison. Please tell me if I'm not paraphrasing this correct. Do an apples-to-apples comparison, and more importantly, move your application from one provider to another based on business decisions, right? Yep. I will tell you, I have no experience leveraging those capabilities, and the reason why I will tell you that is when we start looking at leveraging a particular cloud provider, I've always been one to stand up and say, don't fear vendor lock-in, right? So I've never been a true fan of the cloud abstraction layer because you fight for you have to work towards the lowest common denominator when you're in that model. But I will say there is a case for that. Containers happen to be a case where that is kind of an abstraction layer from the cloud provider. So if you leverage a containerized model such as Docker or those kind of capabilities, you can move your application from one provider to another because they all support that kind of model. But I always tell mission partners that once you make a decision about where the right place to fit your applications, modernize your applications to take advantage of all the secret sauce that that particular provider provides, right? And so, you know, I talk to a lot of mission partners on a regular basis. Vendor lock-in is a concern that they all have, right? And so they're in the model of, if I contract with cloud provider A and I leverage all their APIs, 5 years from now I want to move to cloud provider B, how am I possibly going to do that? And my answer is always, don't fear that, because 5 years from now there's going to be 40 companies that will help you do that, right? And so, migrating applications from one provider to another, abstracting the APIs like that, there are multiple companies out there that are going to help you do that. So don't fear that. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. So the question was about Jedi and the CAP process. I will tell you that Jedi is still in the acquisition phase. I don't really want to talk too much about it. I mean, the RFP, I think, is supposed to hit the street pretty soon. How that solution is going to fit into the overall landscape from a DoD perspective, I think, is still yet to be seen. You know, we work closely with the Jedi program office, so I really don't want to say anything else as far as that goes. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, I thank you for your time this morning. Like I said, we are doing the Cloud Symposium simultaneously upstairs. We have a couple of other sessions later today that may be of interest to you if you're looking at migrating to the cloud. We're also going to repeat this session later today up there also. But thank you for your time.